Ah, pirates. The very word conjures images of wild-eyed men in tricorn hats, parrots on their shoulders, chests of gold buried under palm trees, and endless barrels of rum. In the movies, pirates are always either fighting, drinking, or laughing into the sunset. But let's step off the deck of fantasy and look at what life was really like at sea. Spoiler, it involved a lot less swashbuckling and a lot more waiting, rotting, and itching. Imagine waking up every morning to the smell of salt, tar, sweat, and something worse you can't quite name. The ocean is endless around you, the sun burns your skin raw, and the breeze only sometimes saves you from the stink rising off your own clothes. Most of the time, pirate life wasn't a glorious adventure. It was boredom, days of scanning the horizon, hoping to spot a fat merchant ship. Weeks drifting with nothing to do except patch sails, curse the heat, and complain about dwindling food. The sea was beautiful, sure, but it was also maddeningly empty, and a hungry crew could get ugly fast. And about those famous pirate looks, the rugged, handsome, romantic heroes we've all seen on screen. Forget it. Real pirates were missing teeth, covered in scars and burns from gunpowder, and some had limbs or fingers missing from accidents or fights. The sun turned skin leathery and raw, the salt air made wounds slow to heal, and scurvy left gums black and legs swollen. Baths? Only if it rained hard enough. And even then, it was more like standing on deck with your arms out, hoping to rinse off the worst of the grime. What about those legendary buried treasures? Sorry, those were stories made up later by writers who needed an exciting plot twist. Pirates didn't usually bury gold. Most loot was spent almost as soon as they reached shore, on rum, gambling, and nights in brothels. After all, life was short. Why save for retirement you probably wouldn't live to see? The real treasure wasn't some chest of coins under a palm tree. It was anything they could sell. Spices, cloth, sugar, or even barrels of wine. And if they caught a ship with passengers, the most valuable prize might just be the ransom. And yes, pirates did fight. But it wasn't the elegant sword duels you see in Hollywood. Real battles were short, brutal, and terrifying. Smoke, shouting, blood, splintered wood, and the smell of burnt powder filled the air. Pirates didn't care about fancy technique. They wanted the fight over as fast as possible so they could get to the cargo hold. And sometimes, that meant charging with axes, knives, or anything heavy enough to crack a skull. But most days there was no fighting. Just the endless sea, the rocking of the ship, the creak of timbers, and the constant hope that tomorrow might bring a prize worth risking it all. Forget the feasts of roasted meat, fresh fruit, and golden goblets of wine you see in pirate movies. Real pirate cuisine? Let's just say it wouldn't win a single Michelin star. Imagine waking up to a breakfast that was exactly the same as dinner, and as lunch, and quite possibly as tomorrow's meal too. Pirates lived mostly on salted beef or pork, so salty it could burn your tongue. And ship's biscuit, a rock-hard flour and water cracker tough enough to break your teeth. And yes, they often did. If you got bored of plain biscuit, you could always enjoy the bonus protein crawling inside, weevils and maggots. Some pirates joked it was the only fresh meat they'd see for weeks. Fresh food was almost impossible at sea. Vegetables and fruit rotted within days in the heat. Without them, pirates were often left with scurvy, bleeding gums, teeth falling out, and joints swelling painfully until you could barely walk. They didn't know why it happened, only that it did, and that it was as feared as a cannonball. So what did they drink? Yes, pirates drank rum. Lots of it. But not only because they liked to get drunk. Fresh water stored in barrels quickly turned green and slimy. To kill the smell and bacteria, they'd mix it with beer, wine, or most famously, rum, creating a foul cocktail known as grog. It didn't taste good, but it kept them alive and conveniently, just drunk enough not to think too hard about the weevils in dinner. And when they made it to shore, That's when the real party began. Pirates would blow through months of stolen wealth in a few wild nights. Roasted meat, fresh fruit, wine by the gallon, and yes, more rum than the human liver should ever process. Because after weeks at sea, you never knew if tomorrow would bring another feast. Or your last fight. Picture a pirate ship. Chaos, shouting, and rum bottles rolling across the deck. But underneath all that noise was something you'd never expect from a gang of outlaws. A set of rules. And, believe it or not, a kind of floating democracy. Yes, real pirates were criminals. But they also had something most kings and governors on land never gave their people. A vote. Unlike royal navies, where a captain was an untouchable tyrant, pirate captains were elected by the crew. If the crew lost confidence, if the captain got too greedy, too cowardly, or just plain annoying, they could vote to replace him. It was democracy by cannon and cutlass. Sure, but democracy all the same. Pirate ships even had their own codes, written agreements every man signed before the voyage began. These codes spelled out everything: how loot would be divided, how punishments would work, even rules for keeping weapons ready for battle. Break the code, and your punishment might be whipping, marooning on a deserted island, or in the worst cases, death. So yes, a pirate ship was lawless, but not without law. And the loot? It didn't all go to the captain. Captains usually got a slightly bigger share, as did key officers like the quartermaster. But most of the treasure was divided fairly among the crew. Compare that to life in a navy or on a merchant ship, where sailors earned miserable wages and watched officers pocket fortunes. No wonder piracy looked tempting to some. Even decisions like when to attack or when to flee could be put to a vote. Imagine standing on deck, spyglass in hand, debating whether that distant silhouette is a Spanish treasure ship or a warship itching for a fight, and then letting every man have his say. It wasn't perfect. It could get rowdy, and sometimes deadly. But for a few wild years at sea, pirates built something closer to equality than many civilized governments ever did. And here's the irony. These outlaws, hunted by every empire on earth, ran ships that were, in their own rough way, fairer and freer than the kingdoms trying to wipe them out. So you've risked your life on the high seas. You faced storms, starvation, scurvy, and Spanish cannons. Finally, after weeks or months, you capture a fat merchant ship brimming with silver, spices, and rum. You get your share of the loot. Now what? If you're imagining pirates investing wisely in real estate, silk shirts, and a respectable tavern back home, well, think again. Most pirates didn't see their loot as a long-term plan. They saw it as a chance to finally live like kings, even if it was only for a few days. The moment they hit port, it was party time. They drank rum by the gallon, feasted on fresh meat, tropical fruit, and sweet pastries. They gambled until the last coin was gone. Dice games, cards, anything. And yes, they spent wildly in brothels and taverns, often so much that tavern keepers and local officials were thrilled to see pirate sails on the horizon. Some pirates bought fine clothes, silk waistcoats, gold earrings, fancy hats with bright feathers. Not because they planned to keep them clean and folded, but to swagger through town looking richer than any governor. After months at sea, smelling like dead fish and wet rope, nothing felt better than strutting ashore in velvet, with a sword at your side. And what about burying treasure on desert islands, marked by an X on the map? That almost never happened. Why bury it when you could drink it, gamble it, and show it off? Pirate life was dangerous and often short. Saving for retirement? Not exactly part of the plan. Of course, a few pirates tried to settle down, maybe buy a house, open an inn, or marry into local society. But most of them, by the time they staggered back to their ships, pockets empty and heads pounding, they were already planning the next raid to get more loot, so they could do it all over again. And here's the tragic punchline. For many pirates, the greatest treasure wasn't gold or silver. It was the chance to live free, if only for a while, and spend their hard-won coin however the hell they pleased. All good stories have an ending, and for the pirates of the so-called Golden Age, it wasn't exactly a happy one. By the early 1700s, empires had had enough. Spain, Britain, France, and the Netherlands decided it was time to stop arguing with each other long enough, to hunt down the sea rats stealing everyone's treasure. Governments sent heavily armed navy ships to patrol pirate hotspots. Ports that once quietly welcomed pirates started turning them in, often for a nice reward. And as the age of commerce grew, merchants and politicians realized piracy was bad for business. Suddenly, the party was over. And what happened to the pirates when they got caught? They were dragged back to port in chains. Some were thrown into damp prison cells so small they could barely stand. Many were publicly tried, then hanged in harbor squares as a warning, sometimes leaving their bodies to rot in iron cages over the water, swaying in the breeze. Romantic? No? Brutal? Absolutely. A few famous pirates tried to plead their case. They claimed they'd been forced into piracy or offered to turn informant. Some even escaped the noose by promising to hunt their former comrades. But most ended the same way: a short drop, a quick prayer, and silence. Yet for all the blood and mud, something of them survived. The old legends turned into ballads, then into penny novels, and finally into Hollywood stories about dashing rogues with golden hearts. In the end, history turned real criminals into larger-than-life heroes because, let's be honest, stories about freedom and rebellion sell a lot better than stories about toothaches and scurvy. So what can we learn from the real pirate life? It wasn't all sword fights, buried gold, and romantic sunsets. It was hunger, disease, danger, and a fleeting chance at freedom most people on land never had. And maybe that's why we still love pirate tales, not for what they really were, but for what they let us imagine. A wild, messy life outside the rules, where every man could, for a moment, be his own master. If you enjoyed this glimpse behind the eye patch, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next deep dive into history's myths and realities. Because history isn't just what did happen. Sometimes it's what almost happened, or what we wish had happened, that keeps it alive. Thanks for watching, and until next time, fair winds and no weevils in your biscuits.